Somewhere in the middle of Exodus, most readers stop. You are moving through one of the greatest stories ever told, plagues, the parting of a sea, water from a rock, bread falling from the sky, and then you hit chapter 25, and the story stops. And God starts talking about curtains, curtain measurements, curtain colors, the exact weight of the gold rings that hold the curtain loops. 13 chapters. 13 chapters of this. Acacia wood, blue and purple and scarlet yarn, goat hair, ram skin dyed red, badger skin. You read it once, you feel vaguely guilty for being bored. You skip ahead to the golden calf, and you tell yourself you'll come back to it someday. You never come back to it. Here is what nobody told you. Those 13 chapters are not boring. They are a blueprint, not a blueprint for a tent. A blueprint for everything that comes after, a detailed, room by room, object by object preview of the most important event in human history, written down 15 centuries before it happened. Every measurement means something. Every color is a signal. Every piece of furniture is a signpost, and every signpost is pointing in the same direction. And there is one moment, one single day per year, when a man walks alone through a curtain that no one else is allowed to touch. He wears bells on the hem of his robe so the people outside can hear that he is still moving. He carries blood that is not his own, and if he gets it wrong, if anything about this moment is out of order, he dies inside that room. We will get to that moment. But first, we need to understand why God cared so much about curtain hooks. It begins on a mountain. 40 days. Moses had been on the summit of Sinai for 40 days, inside a cloud that looked like devouring fire to the people watching from below. He was not eating. He was not sleeping. He was being shown something. The text says, God showed him a pattern, a heavenly original that the earthly structure would be built to copy. See that you make it according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. That phrase appears twice in Exodus 25. The writer of Hebrews will quote it again 700 years later and say plainly what Moses could only guess. The thing Moses built was a shadow. The real thing was somewhere else. The Hebrew word for what Moses was told to build is Mishkan. It comes from the root shakan, which means to settle, to dwell, to take up residence, not to visit, not to appear occasionally, to live there. Let them make me a sanctuary, God says in Exodus 25:8, that I may dwell among them. That sentence is the entire point of the tabernacle. Not religion, not ritual, not rules, proximity. God wanted to close the distance that sin had opened in a garden, and his solution for now in this moment of history was a tent. Think about that. The God who made the Milky Way and every galaxy beyond it. The God whose glory made Moses' face burn like sunlight for days after. A single conversation that God chose to live in a tent in the middle of a desert among a group of former slaves who had been worshiping a golden cow 2 months earlier. The theologians call it condescension, not in the insulting sense, in the Latin sense, condescender, to descend, to come down to where someone is. God came down. He pitched his tent in the middle of theirs, and he gave very specific instructions about how the tent should be built. Picture the structure from above. A rectangular courtyard roughly the size of half a football field, surrounded by white linen curtains, 7.5 feet high, bright white, in the middle of a desert. You could see it from a distance. This clean, impossibly white rectangle standing against the sand and the rock and the heat. The people camped around it. 12 tribes, arranged by God's instruction, each one positioned at a specific compass point around the sanctuary. Wherever the tabernacle went, the camp organized itself around it. The dwelling place of God was always the center. There is one way in, one gate, on the east side. The curtains form a continuous wall on every other side. No gaps, no back entrance, no shortcut. You enter from the east, and you enter through a single opening hung with the same 4 colors that appear everywhere in the tabernacle: blue, purple, scarlet, and white. One way into the presence of God. Jesus will stand in a courtyard of his own one day and say, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. He knew exactly what he was referencing. You walk through the gate, and the first thing you encounter stops you. It is not beautiful. Nothing about it is meant to be beautiful. It is a large bronze altar, 5 cubits by 5 cubits, the largest piece of furniture in the entire complex, and it is covered in ash and blood. This is the altar of burnt offering, and it stands between you and everything else. You cannot go deeper into the sanctuary without passing it. You cannot reach God's dwelling without first stopping here. This is where the animal dies. An ordinary Israelite, not a priest, not a Levite, just a person who has sinned and knows it, brings a lamb from his own flock. Not a purchased lamb, his own. The text specifies it must be without blemish. He has examined this animal. He knows this animal, and he walks it to the entrance of the tabernacle, and he places his hand on its head. Stay with me. This moment matters more than almost any other in the entire system. The hand on the head is not a gesture. In Hebrew legal and religious practice, this act, semicha, the laying on of hands, is a transfer. The worshiper is not merely presenting an offering, he is transferring something. His guilt, his record, everything he brought to this gate that he cannot carry past the altar. He presses it through his palm onto the animal, and then the animal dies in his place. The theologians call this substitutionary atonement. The ancient Israelite just called it Tuesday. This was the rhythm of life under the Mosaic system, the constant, unending flow of blood that kept the relationship between a holy God and an unholy people from collapsing entirely. Josephus, writing in his Antiquities of the Jews, describes the daily sacrifices at the tabernacle and later the temple with almost clinical precision. Morning lamb, evening lamb, special offerings for feast days, atonement offerings, peace offerings. The smoke never fully stopped rising. But here is what most people miss. The system was never designed to fix the problem permanently. The writer of Hebrews will say it plainly. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. The altar was not the solution. The altar was a signpost, written in blood and smoke, and the smell of burning wool pointing forward to a morning outside Jerusalem when a man who described himself as the Lamb of God would carry across through a city gate and die outside the walls, without the camp, in the place reserved for things that had absorbed the guilt of others. Past the altar, the priests wash. The bronze laver stands between the altar and the entrance to the holy place. It is a large basin, polished bronze, filled with water, and every priest who serves in the tabernacle must wash at it before entering the holy place, hands and feet, every time. The penalty for skipping this step is written clearly in Exodus 30. Death, not sickness, death. You cannot serve God dirty, not then, not now. Only the priests go further. The ordinary Israelite stops at the altar. He hands his lamb to the priest, watches the smoke rise, and goes home. He never sees what is inside the tent. He never sees what the priests move through every single day. The room beyond the linen curtain, the room where the air smells permanently of something burning and something sweet. The room lit not by sunlight but by fire that never goes out. The holy place. You step through the curtain and the outside world disappears. No desert, no noise of the camp, no sun. The only light comes from the left, a golden lampstand, 7 branches, hammered from a single piece of pure gold, its flames burning on oil pressed from hand-crushed olives. The craftsman who built it was a man named Bezalel, son of Uri, from the tribe of Judah. And here is something the text says about him that should stop you cold. He is the first person in the entire Bible, the very first, described as being filled with the Spirit of God, not a prophet, not a king, a craftsman, an artist. God filled a man with his Holy Spirit so that he could make beautiful things for the place where God would live. That says something about what God thinks of beauty and about what it means to build anything for his presence. The menorah burns continuously, day and night. The priests trim the wicks every morning, refill the oil, keep the flame alive. It never goes out. The Hebrew word for this instruction is tamid, continually, always, without interruption. The same word used for the daily sacrifice, the same word used for God's covenant love. Some things the text insists do not stop. Across the room on the right side stands the table of showbread. 12 loaves of bread arranged in 2 stacks of 6, freshly baked every Sabbath, placed before the presence of God. The old loaves are eaten by the priests, only in the holy place. The bread sits there all week, in the presence of God. The Hebrew name for it is lechem ha-panim, literally, the bread of the face, or the bread of the presence. Bread set before the face of God every week. For 40 years in the wilderness, and then for centuries in the temple that followed, Jesus will stand in a synagogue in Capernaum and say, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry." The people listening to him knew exactly what bread he was talking about, and this is where it gets remarkable. At the far end of the holy place, directly in front of the great curtain that separates the holy place from the room beyond it, stands the smallest altar in the tabernacle. Not bronze this time, gold, the altar of incenses. Acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, with a golden crown around its top, and every morning and every evening the priest burns a specific blend of incense on it. A formula given by God in Exodus 30, a recipe so sacred it was illegal to make it for personal use. The smoke rises, straight up through the curtain, into the room beyond. The Psalms will later describe prayer as incense rising before God. Revelation will show the elders of heaven holding golden bowls full of incense, and the text will identify them plainly, the prayers of the saints. Every prayer you have ever prayed, every whispered word in a dark room, every desperate sentence in a hospital corridor, every quiet morning word over a cup of coffee. The Bible describes those prayers as smoke that rises like incense into the presence of God. 3 objects, 1 room. Light, bread, and prayer, and then the veil. It hangs directly in front of you now, 60 feet tall, woven from blue and purple and scarlet thread and fine white linen. Josephus tells us it was as thick as a man's hand, 4 inches of layered fabric. Cherubim were embroidered into it, their wings spread, as if guarding what lay beyond. You cannot see through it. You cannot move it. Only one person in Israel is permitted to pass through it, and only once per year, and only with blood, and only after a week of ritual preparation that left nothing to chance. You stand in front of that curtain and you feel it, the weight of what it means. God is on the other side, close enough to touch, and completely, definitionally unreachable. For now, behind the veil, the room is perfect. Not perfect in the way we use that word, meaning very good, meaning impressive. Perfect in the mathematical sense. The Holy of Holies is a cube, 10 cubits wide, 10 cubits long, 10 cubits tall. A perfect cube, draped in darkness. No lampstand, no natural light, no window. The only light that ever enters this room is the light that does not come from fire. The Hebrew word is Shekinah. It does not actually appear in the Old Testament. It is a later rabbinic term, built from that same root we saw earlier, shakan, to dwell. But what it describes is woven into the fabric of Exodus, the visible, luminous, overwhelming presence of God Himself, a cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. And here in this room, concentrated into a space 10 cubits square, resting between the wings of 2 golden angels, the glory of the God who made everything. And it rests on a box. The Ark of the Covenant is acacia wood, overlaid inside and out with pure gold, approximately 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. Inside it, the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, a jar of manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, the law, the bread, the sign of priestly authority, everything that defined Israel's covenant relationship with God, sealed inside a box, placed in the darkest room of the most restricted building in the camp. But it is not the box that matters most. On top of the ark sits the Cappareth. Most English Bibles translate this as the mercy seat. That translation is not wrong, but it is thin. The Hebrew root is kaphar, to cover, to cancel, to make atonement. The Cappareth is not a seat in the furniture sense. It is a covering, a lid, made of solid gold, exactly the same dimensions as the ark beneath it, and on each end, cast from the same piece of gold as the lid itself, two cherubim, angelic figures, face each other with their wings spread upward, their faces tilted down, looking at the surface between them, looking at exactly one spot. God speaks to Moses in Exodus 25 and tells him precisely where the divine voice will come from when Moses needs to hear it from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim, not from the mountain, not from the burning bush, from that spot, that specific, gold-covered, blood-sprinkled spot between two angels staring downward. Now hold that image. The law is inside the box, the perfect standard that every human being has broken, the requirements that condemn by their very existence. And above the law, covering it, is the Cappareth, the covering, the place where blood is applied once a year to shield the law from the people and the people from the law. The mercy seat does not eliminate the law. It covers it, atones for it, stands between the broken covenant and the God whose covenant it was. Pay attention to this. The entire theology of the Bible is sitting in that image. The law is real. The standard is real. The failure is real. And the only thing that stands between that failure and the holy God who sees it is a covering, applied by a priest, paid for by blood. Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher writing in the 1st century, looked at the ark and the mercy seat and wrote that the Cappareth represented the grace of God overruling his own justice, not canceling it, not pretending it does not exist, but satisfying it, meeting it, covering it completely. He wrote that without fully understanding what he was describing. The thing he was describing had not happened yet. It would happen in 30 years, outside Jerusalem, on a hill, with nails. The ark disappeared from history after the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in 586 BC. Nobody knows where it went. The second temple, the one standing in Jesus' day, had a Holy of Holies with nothing in it, an empty room, a curtain guarding a vacant space. The rabbis called it the Devier, the speaking place, and they mourned that the voice no longer came from between the cherubim. They were looking in the wrong room. Once a year, everything stopped, not just in the tabernacle, in the entire camp of Israel. The 10th day of the 7th month, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, was the single most serious day on the Hebrew calendar. No work, no food, no noise. The entire nation fasted and waited while one man did something that no one else in Israel was permitted to do in a room that no one else in Israel was permitted to enter, carrying something that had to be exactly right, or he would not walk back out. The high priest began his preparation 7 days before. 7 days of ritual purification. He left his house and moved into a chamber inside the temple complex. Other priests were assigned to keep him awake the night before, because if he fell asleep and had a dream that rendered him ritually unclean, the entire ceremony was void. He bathed 5 times on the day itself. He changed garments 4 times. He rehearsed every movement of what he was about to do until it lived in his hands and his feet and his breathing. On the morning of Yom Kippur, he dressed in white linen, not the ornate golden vestments he wore on ordinary days. On this day, white linen only, the color of purity, the color of the curtains around the courtyard, the color that meant, I am not coming in here on my own authority. I am coming in here covered. And then he put on his outer robe, the blue one, with the hem. Here is the part nobody tells you. Soon into the hem of the high priest's outer robe, alternating all the way around, were pomegranates made of blue and purple and scarlet thread, and bells, golden bells, so that when he moved, you could hear him. The people standing outside the Holy of Holies, the other priests, the Levites, the waiting crowd, They could not see him once he passed through the curtain. This, as long as the bells were ringing, he was alive. As long as the bells were ringing, the blood had been accepted. As long as the bells were ringing, Israel had another year. Some ancient sources, including the Talmudic tractate Yoma, which contains the most detailed surviving account of the Yom Kippur ceremony, describe a rope tied around the high priest's ankle before he entered. Not mentioned in the Torah directly, debated by scholars, but preserved in the tradition for a reason. If the bells stopped, if the silent sins came, someone had to retrieve the body. Nobody else could go in. The rope was the only way to bring him out. This was not theater. This was not ceremony for ceremony's sake. This was the cost of proximity to holiness. This was what it meant to stand in the presence of a God who was not safe, not domesticated, not indifferent to how he was approached. Aaron knew this better than anyone. His two oldest sons, Nadab and Abihu, trained priests, men who had stood on the mountain with Moses and seen the God of Israel and eaten and drunk in his presence, walked into the tabernacle one day and offered incense with fire they had not been commanded to use. The text calls it Esh Zara, strange fire, unauthorized fire, fire of their own invention. And fire came out from the presence of God and consumed them. They died in the place where they served. Aaron was not permitted to mourn. The camp was not permitted to stop. You read that story and you feel the cold of it. 2 men, 2 priests, 2 sons of the high priest himself, dead because they approached the holy God on their own terms instead of his. Now you understand what the bells meant. Now you understand why the rope existed. The high priest takes the blood of the bull, sacrificed for himself and his household first, because he is not innocent either. And he takes the blood of the goat, sacrificed for the sins of the nation, and he walks to the curtain, the great curtain, 60 feet of layered fabric embroidered with cherubim, the curtain that has stood between Israel and the immediate presence of God since the day Bezalel's hands finished it in the desert. He parts it. He steps through. The bells keep ringing. He moves to the ark. He dips his finger in the blood, and he sprinkles it on the caprith, the mercy seat, the covering, once and then 7 times. The law is beneath his hand, the blood is above it, and for 1 more year the covering holds. He walks back through the curtain. The bells are still ringing. He is still alive. Outside, the crowd exhales. They did it again. Another year, another covering, another reprieve built not on their goodness. They had no goodness to bring, but on the blood of an animal that died so they could stand. But here is what every high priest who ever lived knew in the part of himself he did not say aloud in the temple courts. This was not finished. The animal tomorrow would need another animal. The covering this year would need another covering next year. The bells would ring again in 12 months, and the rope would be tied again, and the blood would be sprinkled again, and the people would fast and wait again. The system worked. But the system was not the destination. It was the map. On a Friday afternoon in Jerusalem, around the 9th hour, 3 o'clock, by our reckoning, a man died on a cross outside the city walls. He had been awake since Gethsemane. He had been beaten since before sunrise. He had carried a crossbeam through streets lined with people who 6 days earlier had laid palm branches at his feet. He was crucified between 2 criminals, outside the camp, in the place reserved for things that had absorbed the guilt of others. And just before he died, he said something that the Gospel of John records in a single Greek word, tetelestai. It is finished, not I am finished, not it is over. The word tetelestai was written across paid invoices in the ancient world. It was the word a priest wrote on a sacrifice that had been examined and found acceptable. It was a legal declaration, a commercial receipt, a priestly certification, all compressed into one word spoken from a Roman cross by a man with thorns on his head and nails in his hands. And at that moment in the temple 400 meters away, the curtain tore, not from the bottom up, as a man would tear it, grabbing the hem and pulling. From the top down, 60 feet of 4-inch thick layered fabric, from ceiling to floor, split in two. Matthew records it, Mark records it, Luke records it. The curtain that had stood between the presence of God and the people of God since the days of Moses. The curtain that the high priest approached once a year with bells and blood and a rope around his ankle. That curtain came apart like paper. The way was open, not for one man, not once a year, not with animal blood and golden bells and a rope tied to your ankle in case you did not survive. The approach, for anyone, at any time, through the torn curtain, through the body of the one the writer of Hebrews calls our great high priest, who passed not through a curtain of woven linen, but through death itself, and came back out the other side. The way into the presence of God stands open. The tabernacle was never the point. It was always the preview. So here is what 15 centuries of bells and blood and incense smoke were trying to tell you. First, God has always wanted to live among his people, not above them, not distant from them, among them. He chose a tent in a desert to make that point. He chose a body in Bethlehem to make it permanent. The whole movement of the Bible, from the garden where God walked in the cool of the day, to the tabernacle in the wilderness, to the temple in Jerusalem, to a carpenter's son who was called Emmanuel, God with us, is a single unbroken sentence about proximity. God keeps closing the distance. God keeps moving toward people who have no right to be moved toward. And he is not finished yet. Second, every object in the sanctuary was whispering the same name for 1,500 years. The lamb at the bronze altar, the bread on the table, the light that never went out, the blood on the mercy seat, the high priest in white linen walking through the curtain. Every one of them was a sentence in a language that the people heard but did not yet fully understand. A language that became flesh and walked among them and said plainly, in words they could not misunderstand, I am the door, I am the bread, I am the light, I am the way. Third, and this is the one that should stay with you longest, the rope was real. The bells were real. The risk was real. For 1,500 years, one man once a year tied a rope to his ankle and walked into a room where the wrong move meant death, carrying blood that was never quite enough, covering sins that would need covering again next year. He did it because someone had to, because the distance between a holy God and an unholy people could not simply be ignored, because proximity to real holiness has always cost something real. And then one morning, the tomb was empty, and the high priest who walked out alive was not a man in white linen with bells on his robe. He was a man with nail scars in his hands, and he did not walk back through the curtain to wait another year. He sat down. The writer of Hebrews notices this, notices that the new high priest sat down because there are no chairs in the holy place, because a priest's work is never finished until the day it was. He sat down at the right hand of God, and the bells have not stopped ringing since. The way is open. It has been open for 2,000 years. Walk through.